Five. Good evening, everyone. My name is Janine Davis, and I am program chairman for the Alpha Delta Omega chapter of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. And I want to thank everyone for joining us, and especially our Facebook Live audience, to have a conversation in celebration of Dr. Martin Luther King Jr.'s birthday today. And we have some esteemed panelists and a moderator who will take us deeper into that conversation. The purpose of our event is in 1967, Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. acknowledged that progress has been made in civil rights and equality, but warned that there were certain evils that exist. He also listed the unfulfilled promises in the Declaration of Independence and the US Constitution to provide examples of continued racism, yet another warning. This is the radical Dr. King few remember today. Racial injustice is still our burden and America's shame. And we must face the hard fact that many Americans would like to have a nation which is a democracy for some, but simultaneously a dictatorship over others. And here we are, 35 years later on this National Day of Observance. Time has passed. Society has strayed away from its ideals and forgotten that whatever affects one directly affects all indirectly. Now more than ever, and beyond today's observance, it's important to keep his radical work alive and hold those threatening to undermine it accountable. Dr. King spoke of three major evils: the evil of racism, the evil of poverty, and the evil of war. Our purpose today is to keep those societal evils present in our work, our conversation, and our service in our nation. So again, welcome to this special presentation sponsored by the Alpha Delta Omega chapters, Nu Kappa Omega chapter, and Pi Nu Omega chapter, respectively, here in the Middle Tennessee area. And at this time, I will call my sorority sister to give us a poem.
Good evening. My name is Carlene Alford Massey, and I'm a member of Nu Kappa Omega chapter from Clarksville, Tennessee. For this occasion, I have chosen the poem Me, My God, and My Destiny, a tribute to Dr. Martin Luther King Jr., written by Mr. John Goode. I keep having this reoccurring dream, and in this dream, I sit alone in a room in Tennessee, and it's just me, my God, and my destiny. And I feel like I've given this world the best of me. But now I can hear the balcony, and the balcony is calling for the rest of me. And I can hear its sweet song like the sirens of the Odyssey. And here I sit in a cold sweat in this room in Tennessee, and it's just me, my God, and my destiny. And I've walked from Selma to Montgomery with a multitude behind me and an angry horde in front of me, with nothing but the strength of the Lord up under me and the weight of the world on my shoulders. But I will not backpedal, and I will not retreat. I will not concede defeat. I've seen the fate of those who've come before me. I've looked into the face of Hoover and those who abhor me. I've been arrested in Georgia. I'm detested in Tennessee, Alabama, and Mississippi. But if God be for me, who can stand against me? He has blessed me and let me stand on Lincoln steps in the heart of DC and deliver a speech so passionate and unique about my dreams for equality that it reached my detractors and made them acknowledge me. It was filled with so much truth, some of them began to follow me. I tell you that I've moved mountains with mere mustard seeds, and all that's left for me is what awaits on this balcony. I stand face to face with my destiny, and the irony is that no man really lives that long. But through my death, maybe my dream could live on. Through those of you who find the voice to sing freedom's song, through those of you who speak of our struggles to your daughters and your sons, through those of you who pick up the baton and continue to race on, through those of you who understand that freedom is for all or freedom is for none. Our fight is for the all, and our fight is for the one until God's will for us all be done. I tell you, I had a dream that I was alone in Tennessee, and it was just me, my God, and my destiny. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Carlene. Next up, we have Miss Christy Robinson.
Good evening. I am Christy Robinson from the Pi Nu Omega chapter. I have the pleasure of introducing our moderator for the evening. Harriet Wallace is an award-winning multimedia journalist at Fox 17 News in Nashville. You can watch her every day at 5:30 discussing the news of the day. You can also watch her on Sunday mornings at 9:30, where she co-hosts Nashville in Focus. Harriet is the first African-American at Fox 17 News to host an original talk show. She is also a Nashville native who graduated from Hunters Lane High School. She has spent nearly 2 decades in the business and is the lead host for the popular Pumps and Politics talk show, which she created. She has also been at the forefront of many of the country's biggest headlines and was the only news reporter from Northwest Arkansas to be embedded with the Red Cross during Hurricane Katrina. She also provided network news coverage for Hurricane Rita. Not one to miss a big story, she covered other big news events such as the Virginia Tech mass shooting and the Mary Winkler trial. She just doesn't report. Harriet has produced Emmy Award-winning newscasts. When she is not in the newsroom covering the big stories, you can find her in the community. She is the co-founder of the North Nashville Flood Relief Group that helped more than 500 residents recover from the historic 2010 flood. She's received numerous community awards and is a proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, Links Incorporated, and is a former 2-term president of the Nashville chapter of the National Association of Black Journalists. When she's not practicing journalism, she's teaching it. She teaches journalism and communications on the collegiate level and has won awards for her teaching, such as Journalism Educator of the Year by the Southeastern Journalism Conference. Harriet received her undergraduate degree from Hampton University's Scripps Howard School of Journalism, her master's from Austin Peay State University, and is currently a candidate for her PhD in public administration. She is happily married to Scott Wallace, with whom they co-own the Wallace Media Group and a semi-pro football team. Together, they have helped send more than 100 students to college on scholarships and dozens of players to professional sporting teams. I introduce to you Ms. Harriet Wallace.
Thank you so much, Christy. I appreciate that very warm introduction. Beautiful spirit, beautiful voice, and I'm so thankful. Thankful to be here this evening with you all for a most important discussion on a most important day. Obviously the timing is just perfect, and I believe as we really set the table for tonight's discussion, we really have to, consider the context in which we're having this discussion. We are about to inaugurate our new president, Joe Biden, as well as Kamala Harris. And we know the history that she will present America with on that day, but also with all of the civil and social unrest that is before us and around us. How perfect a timing of this conversation it is. So I'm very much looking forward to this conversation that is much needed. But let me introduce you to those who will be joining us for the discussion. We've got Dennis Dickerson, a professor of history at Vanderbilt University. He is also an accomplished author, I believe 3 books under his belt and 1 more on the way. He is an elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church and served as pastor of 3 congregations in Massachusetts, New York, and Tennessee. We've also got Linda Williams. She is professor of the practice at Middle Tennessee State University in the Department of Criminal Justice Administration, With this appointment in 2017, she became the first to receive this recognition. It is an honor given because of her work in the criminal justice and executive security industry. She is a veteran of the United States Secret Service, where she retired as the Deputy Assistant Director in 2017. She served in the Protection Division for President Bill Clinton and Vice President Al Gore. She is the first African-American woman to serve as a supervisor in this major field office. And then lastly, we've got Vonda McDaniel, who joined the United Rubber Workers in 1992 at the Bridgestone Firestone Laverne plant. She served as a trainer in the Women of Steel program. Vonda was elected president of the Central Labor Council of Nashville and Middle Tennessee in 2013. She is vice chair of the Music City Center and a member of a number of organizations, including the NAACP, and is a life member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated. Welcome to my panelists. How are you this evening? Is everybody unmuted?
Unmuted. Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
All right, very good. Well, thank you all for joining us for this conversation. I'm excited. Just a reminder to those who are here joining us for this conversation, we are going to be taking questions from you a little bit later on in the program. So we do want you to follow along in this conversation. Post your questions in the chat. We've got a few lovely ladies who are going to be monitoring your questions, and we're going to get those to the panelists and out to the group. So again, put your questions and comments in the chat as we go along. Well, first, I've got some questions lined up for you all, again, as we embark on this discussion. First, let me ask, and what role, as we talk about faith and where we are as a country right now, and also on this day of Dr. Martin Luther King, what role or roles have churches and faith-based organizations historically played in encouraging change in our communities? And do you believe that role has evolved today? Let me start with our elder here who was on the board, Mr. Dickerson. If you could share your thoughts about that.
Thank you very much for the very kind introduction and for the question. Historically, African-American churches have been the primary venues in which Black people have found safety and refuge. In the antebellum period, in the period before the Civil War, these were some of the only places in which Black people who were escaping slavery could find safety and security and protection from marauding slave patrollers and slave catchers. These churches were also oftentimes the only venues where Black people, as well as their white allies, could meet and voice their protest and to pursue the cause of abolition. A similar role came to the Black church in the post-Civil War period and during the age of Jim Crow. And so it's no mistake that in the mid-20th century, Black churches were, again, an important venue where from which Black protest was launched. Whites who were hostile to African-American progress are very familiar with that history. As we know, in the recent past, Black churches have been places that persons opposed to Black advancement have physically assaulted. Just a couple of weeks ago in Washington, D.C., two historic Black churches, Asbury United Methodist Church and Metropolitan AME Church, were the targets of persons who tore down their banners for Black Lives Matter. So this has been a historic aegis, a historic place of refuge and protection for African-American peoples.
Linda and Vonda, let me ask you ladies, because Dennis gave us some pretty good historical context there with regards to the role of the church, the faith-based groups, if we will, in social justice. Where are we today? Because, you hear a lot of people when candidates run for office, they're offended when they come to the Black church. But as Dennis explained, that's always been tradition, but we're not in that place today. Would you say, or do you disagree? Where are we today?
So I'll start. Thank you for having me. All that I am and all that I hope to be, it is through
Christ who strengthens me. And I learned that as a little girl in church. And although the building has physically been separated for us, but the church is in us, and those same cornerstones are what we stand on today. We see that we have to get back to the basics, even though that, this pandemic has prevented us from physically gathering. But the church is our cornerstone. It gives us our hope and our inspiration and those principles on which to stand. And that's what unites us regardless of our nationality, our social economic class, that the church is the cornerstone, because that's where it all started for many of us, that we learn what was right and what was wrong. And we learn how to respect our fellow man. So it's ironic that through these chaotic times that we have to get back to that basic principle of loving our neighbors. And that still is part of us. So the church might physically be closed, but inside of us is where we carry the church. And that's my cornerstone on which I stand every day.
Rhonda, what are your thoughts? Is the church still really kind of the center place, kind of ground zero for, Black thought, Black movement? Is that where everyone needs to go, or do you see, or should go, or have you seen the church's role evolve?
So I appreciate grounding the conversation in that question. I think it's a little unfair to have to go behind Dr. Dickerson and Linda, but I will say that today's, especially in Nashville, as we listen to James Lawson talk about how the movement really in the 60s was organized in the church. The church served as an organizing center during the movement, particularly here in Nashville. It was a launching point for the protests that were organized here. And today, I think that perhaps the church is not always prioritized social and economic justice, but we're finding that it's a place where those conversations are beginning to happen more and more often, because it is a touch point in our communities for conversation, for connection, and is the future, in my opinion, as well as the past, in terms of how we organize and build community going forward.
And you set up my next question very well. We are starting to see, and we've been experiencing an emergence of, I guess, if you will, new social justice advocates and leaders. And they're not in church. They're not in a lot of now they may believe in God and go to their groups or whatever higher being, but they're not organizing within the institutions. They're really kind of like franchise, if you will. You have different pockets of organizers who are really kind of individual. So let me ask you all, we saw, if y'all remember, Al Sharpton spoke about it. I believe it was at Michael Brown's funeral, I believe it was. And he had some words to say about a lot of the young activists who were organizing on social media, shutting streets down. And there was a break between old school and the new school. Do you all see there being a break there, or how can that divide be settled? What way can we reach to the past to bring to the present? Anyone can take that.
So I'll be happy to take a stab at it. When in Ferguson, when Michael Brown was killed, what we saw was young people taken to the streets. And what we began to see was the kind of generational fissures that had taken place, because you had, the traditional folks from the movement that responded in Ferguson, that went to the streets with the young people, and they had no relationship to those young people. I don't know that the church has always kept up with the mediums that young people communicate well in, but it was in those streets that reconnections began to occur. What is the woman that just got elected to Cori Bush? Is that her name? You know, she was one of the activists that was a part of Ferguson that has kind of been a bridge between the church and those activists in the streets, because the power, the organizing power, you know, in this last election, we began to see some trends that were more positive, where young people were voting in larger numbers, but your voting blocks in the Black community have come out of the church. And they are mostly demographically older voters. And so if we're to reach a new generation of activists, then the church is going to have to think about how we are relevant to those young activists and serve as a training ground for those folks.
And I would like to add, you know, you can't teach a child to color, dream in color, and then take away their crayons. So those children, this generation, they're standing on the shoulders of many. You know, they're a little more vocal, they're a little more, you know, outgoing, because they have been molded, because, you know, we've led the path for them to go down. And so they don't have to go through all the challenges and the potholes. But what we find is that you still have to guide them. You know, even in the law enforcement community, there's an initiative called Faith in Blue Community, where we have to show these young Americans, you have a right to speak. Use your voice. You don't have to silence, but you have to give them structure to do so. And that comes all the way back to our faith community, because there was still respect. And even still, you know, although some people have strayed away, but if it's in you, you know where you come from and you know what you believe in. And so even as this movement has transitioned to this vocal arena that we do now, but we as the church, we as you know, the more mature crowd, we have to massage and funnel and teach them how to use this voice. So you can't get away from your roots, because again, that's what you stand on. And those people that don't have that center and that core, then those are the ones tends to get lost. And so we are bringing that revival of church back around, so people can have the same morals to realize we can be different and still work for the same goals.
That's a really good point. Dr. Is it that easy? Right. And it makes sense. Right. And that's how you evolve. You know what I mean? You train those who are coming behind you. That's a true sign of leadership. Is it? Please share what you were going to add, Dr. Dixon. And then also, is it that easy?
Well, first of all, I'd like to build on what the two speakers have correctly indicated about the importance of the church as an anchor and as a guide. And that responsibility still is an important one to assert. At the same time, I want us to be mindful. I try to remind myself that the Black church, which is just a microcosm of the Black community, remains under siege, just as we were under siege during the period of slavery, and Black churches were the targets of racists and slaveholders who tried to undermine and destroy it. There have been similar forces in the 20th century to 21st century that have destroyed African-American communities. I'm a newcomer to Nashville. I come from Pittsburgh, from the Pittsburgh area, where the Black communities were anchored in the steel and coal industries. My father, two grandfathers, a great grandfather were all steel workers. And the stalwart presence in their communities was the Black church, but not only the Black church, the Elks, the Eastern Star. My mother belonged to the Phyllis Wheatley Literary Society and so forth. We had this aggregation of Black institutions that were anchors for the African-American community. And these were the institutions that were enabled to give guidance to youth. That's not the demographic or the spatial reality that many communities, not unlike Nashville, not unlike Pittsburgh, where urban renewal and other kinds of social and economic forces has disaggregated, dispersed Black communities and have weakened these institutions, not only the church, but the fraternities and the sororities and the banks and the newspapers and all of that whole network of institutions which kept African-American communities resilient and strong. We have to be about the business of reconstituting and rebuilding and reinvigorating these Black institutions. It's not the fault of the church or the sororities or fraternities, nor of the young people that they've been alienated. There have been broader forces that have attacked the Black community and dispersed it so that these institutions no longer have the kind of influence and the kind of reach that they once had. So this is a period, I think, of not only staying stalwart in the struggle and in the battle for African-American advancement, but also it's a call for us to reconstitute and rebuild these institutions that have been so important in our history.
Well, one of the things that you talk about is really kind of staying grounded. You speak of or allude to, you know, the importance and the necessity of synergy and cohesion. I want to move to another important topic. Let's talk criminal justice reform. With the state of the current political climate, do you all believe that that is possible? Is criminal justice reform possible in the climate that we're in? And of course, we consider we've got some African Americans and other people of color who are in positions of power, but they're not the power structure. So can we bring about criminal justice reform with the climate that we're in? And if not, how do we bring it about? What's the answer? Linda, I'll come to you because you've got a strong background. This is your wheelhouse, right?
Right there. And in addition to being a wonderful and proud member of Alpha Kappa Alpha Sorority Incorporated, I also serve as national president for the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executives. And that's a conglomeration of law enforcement from every walk, globally as well. And so again, we do believe in that. And as the incoming president in July, police reform is one of my agenda items. Chaos comes before change. And, you know, we see ourselves in the same mess that we did many, many years ago. But for a time such as this, we have learned lessons and we realize that our strength is our unity. And we have to use our voices. And organizations like mine, Noble, that we have to push national legislation, not that it's left at the discretion of a police chief or an executive to do what he or she interprets as the law, but there's an accountability and there are transparency that they are accountable to the very communities that they raise their hands to serve. And so we have to look at that and change the whole trajectory. You cannot allow police to police themselves. That's what we've seen played over month after month, week after week. So yes, it is. You know, a change is not easy. And before there's any change, we have to go through the birth and pain. But for a time such as this, when our world is yielding and crying and giving birth pains, we're gonna see a change. Just like when Dr. King, it wasn't easy. And you know, everybody didn't make it across, but collectively, he left us a blueprint that still stand. And even in this chaos that we stand today, we have to still hold tight, strap up and keep moving and speak and use our voices, because all of us, and even more so in the positions that we as African Americans have been given, it's not a time to shrink. It's a time to unify and speak boldly, power to truth.
Vonda, how do we do that? How do we speak boldly and speak power to truth when we're not the ones in majority power? How can we make that come about? Is it possible, do you think?
So I definitely think that it is possible. But I think that sitting on the executive council of the AFL-CIO, we have 16 unions that represent law enforcement. We also have other organizations like Linda Williams that represent Black law enforcement. And they are in positions of power. They are police chiefs. They are, you know, law enforcement leaders in their cities. And so, I think that how we change criminal justice and how it is, what it looks like in our communities is bringing everyone to the table. We have to bring all the stakeholders to the table, and we have to come up with reforms, not without understanding all of the voices that are impacted by criminal justice reform, both by their livelihoods and by what we're experiencing in our communities with over policing. So I absolutely think that it is important, especially that, church faith communities get involved in that conversation, in addition to or audiences like this, because it affects our communities the most. And so we are the ones that should definitely engage in those conversations and be a part of crafting the policy going forward.
Dr. Dixon, is it, when we talk about how we move things forward, how we bring about change, how we speak to the powers that be and become the powers that be, I want to ask you about marching, protesting. Do you still see that as an effective tool as we consider, the changing of the guard of social activists and moving within the power circles to bring about change, whether it's criminal reform or just, across the board with race relations? Where do you see marching and protesting nowadays? Is it still effective?
I think one of the many takeaways from what happened in the Capitol on January 6th is that violence doesn't work. Violence has the effect of alienating. It has the effect of destroying any opportunity for meaningful and productive discourse. Marching and protesting aimlessly does not work, but marching and protesting with clearly articulated objectives and with a disciplined moral methodology can be effective. That's been demonstrated across the globe and in the United States, with Gandhi and winning the independence of his nation from British colonialism, to the important gains from the civil rights movement, from the important strides of the labor movement when it was absolutely deadly for persons who were fighting to forge unions, who put their lives on the hand, but through that kind of collective discipline, organizing and marching and protesting brought about effects that all of us benefit from: minimum wage, protections, safety protections in the workforce, and so forth. All of that as a result of non-violent, disciplined protests. What happened on January 6th is Exhibit A in how not to achieve your objectives.
So how not to do a lot, I would think. Yes, go ahead, Vonda.
Could I circle back just to put a point? One of the things
go ahead.
Nonviolent direct action was one of the things that Reverend Lawson really talked about today, and how the Black Lives Matter movement over the course of the summer had really elevated this conversation. I mean, we have been having police killing Black men and women for years, as long as we can remember, right? But over the course of this summer, maybe it was because of the pandemic when folks were sitting home a bit slowed down and able to see that the protests are now, this is one of the agenda items that the new administration is going to have to deal with. It is not the only part of policy change, but I would say that nonviolent direct action is definitely necessary to bring important causes to the attention of the public.
Is that where we are though? Right, and you all bring up a really good point, and I've had this discussion on a few other platforms. I just want to get your thoughts about it. We saw over the summer a lot of action. We saw a lot of marches, and we saw a lot of protests that were happening because of a lot of the injustice that we've been experiencing. It's, you know, obviously coming off of the George Floyd shooting, yet another name to add to the list. We've seen it a lot. But I want to go back to something you said, Dr. Dickinson, and then also to the ladies here, that you have the protest, but then you have to have a plan. Do we, not just here locally, what we saw over the summer, but nationally, is there an actual plan and the plan to execute the plan? For example, when we saw Dr. King leading the marches and doing the protest, and a lot of some of our young Fisk and TSU students doing sit-ins and the ride-alongs, we know that Dr. King would then go into the offices of mayors and governors and presidents. Are we there yet? Do you, based on your grade, are we doing that? Or have we yet to get to that part of social change?
I think that there's been an unexpected synergy among various segments of the Black population in bringing to the fore the issue of criminal justice reform as being the key civil rights movement issue upon which so many other issues hang. There has to be a division of responsibility and a division of obligation in terms of bringing these objectives to fruition. For example, a few years ago, a very important and a very insightful academic, Michelle Alexander, wrote a book on the new Jim Crow and demonstrating how mass incarceration became the new type of oppression that really assailed the African-American community. Out from that awakening, out from that awareness about the key issue that is criminal justice reform, came the Black Lives Matter movement, which has made that issue front and center. There's hardly a person, if you're alive and you have ears and eyes to see and hear, you know that Black Lives Matter has made criminal justice the critical issue facing Black people. And this past summer, with the series of demonstrations, all of which were nonviolent, and in light of what happened last week, several days ago at the Capitol, Black Lives Matter has shown that they are the adults in the room in terms of
Right.
putting forth an objective, a disciplined organization, bringing together Black male and Black female organizations and organizers and spokespersons to make this the critical issue that the incoming Biden-Harris administration is going to grapple with, not in a supplementary way, but in a major way. It's front and center. The importance of Michelle Alexander's book, the Black Lives Matter movement, now it's in the arena of politics. That's how movements and objectives get heard and how they're achieved. I'm very impressed with how this movement has progressed. We're not there yet because there are thousands upon thousands of persons who are unjustly incarcerated, men and women, Black and white, because of unfair sentencing and other kinds of police and legal system misconduct. It's an unavoidable issue that all of us are going to have to grapple with, and the political system, the body politic, will have to grapple with.
Please let me just say, what occurred at the nation's capital on January 6th, by all definitions of what domestic terrorism is, that it was, with so many other things. The movement of the Black Lives Matter, that was a movement. And yes, we have to still speak because our strength is in our unity. If Linda Williams is out there trying to sing by herself, it's going to be a hot mess. But if I got everybody, I think Vonda can carry a tune, then we got a choir and our volume is magnified. So our strength is our unity. And yes, we have to keep on. And even though the system is, stacked up against us, that's why Black Lives Matter is still one of the agenda items for this new incoming administration, because we are not sitting on the wayside. And I might not have experienced that, but again, we as a people, we have. And so we have to, and it has to keep on. There's fashions of it that have some infiltration of some, violence, but the Black Lives Movement is a unified movement, and it has different pockets. Now, the difference is when Dr. King, he was that drum major, but you have Noble, you have, like you say, our Greek sororities and fraternities. We have the church and so many others that recognize this. So that strength is that we are all singing the same song. And so even if you take out a pocket, the movement still goes on.
Now, let me ask you all this. How does Martin Luther King's work and legacy impact the work for justice in 2021? What is the impact there? And something to think about, what elements of his life and work do you believe resonate with today's activists? And is that enough?
So, one of the things, especially being here in Tennessee, the sanitation strike is one that I have, put together and taken apart numerous times over the 30 years that I have been working in the labor movement. What you had there was a group of workers that really were not operating with approval of their international union. But you had two men that were crushed to death on the back of a garbage truck. And then you had a rainy day where the white workers at the sanitation department were allowed to stay, and more than 1,000 workers were sent home. At that point, they were like, we've had it, we're leaving, right? So they left. They were able to pull together faith leaders, of which the SCLC and James Lawson was a part of that group. You had the unions, you had students that participated. There were a variety of the community that came together for the dignity and respect for those men on the job. That model exists today. The fact of the matter is that I think that too often, to the point of your last question, I'm not sure how closely all of those different organizations work together. We may come together to put together our King Day program, but we should be working together on an ongoing basis to address, many of the problems that are happening in our community. So I do think that there is a model there from the work that Dr. King did, but I think that we have some work to do yet to make sure that we are doing our due diligence to build the beloved community.
Let me get you all thoughts, Dr. Dickerson or Linda, you want to weigh in on that? Do you see any traces of Dr. King and in today's movements? Are you seeing any influence at all? Any connections, any impact?
I think, and there's one of the, in fact, this is one of the questions that I see on the chat, that what Stacey Abrams has demonstrated in Georgia, and she didn't do it last week. She's been doing this over the course of the years, doing grassroots organizing through the various organizations that have been affiliated together to produce the result of a Ralph Warnock and a John Ossoff and others being elected to office. That effort, together with what Black Lives Matter has done just in the past year in terms of dramatizing the importance of criminal justice reform, those are all movements that are derivative from the many things that Dr. King pioneered in the 1960s, not only with helping to agitate for civil rights legislation, but shifting the focus to the importance of the working poor. That's who that he was focused on in Memphis. These were persons working full time at minimum wage and not making enough to sustain themselves, and showing that it was important for Black people, for Black men and Black women to be able to sustain themselves economically. The movements that we have talked about today are derivative from those efforts, and no, the objectives have not been attained. But as long as those movements still have energy and still have focus, and you have people who are honing their organizational skills, I think much can happen.
And just to echo on that, again, our strength is our unity. Dr. King gave us a wonderful roadmap to show us how that even against all odds, that if we stand up, they can't knock us all down, that a change is going to come. And so he did leaves us a blueprint. But even as we move forward now with more technology and more voices and more platforms and people that like our sister in Georgia and coming into the White House, those give us extra voices. But again, the strategy has to be there. So even as we regalvanate and go forth, we have to be clear on our strategies, because again, if we all marching and nobody has said what the destination is or how we get there or where we're going, then we're not in tandem. And so that was one thing about Dr. King. He communicated with the movement so everybody would know what he was doing. And so we still have to use now with all of the means that we have in this virtual platform to communicate so that we can still stand strong, because again, we will only be recognized if we stand with all our differences and let our voices be heard. And knowing that we don't shrink to make anyone feel small or uncomfortable. We have to continue to be uniquely us. And they don't get to discount our experiences because they have not lived in brown skin, that they have not worked in law enforcement, that they have not worked in all areas of life, and discount my experiences. So we're not telling them that they have to agree, but what we're telling them is you need to understand that all of my experiences are validated by my existence. So yes, there is a blueprint, and we have to hone on that and be strategic as we move forward.
Well, and as you mentioned that, Linda, I want to ask you all, we've clearly, identified that there is energy, there is synergy, there is movement, there's activity. There has been a push through the doors that have been closed. Where do you all see right now where there is hope, where there is change in this modern time? I mean, obviously the first answer is you all already touched on it, as we see, our now Vice President-elect Kamala Harris. We're seeing that hope and we're seeing that change. Stacey Abrams, you all mentioned. Where else, even on a local level, are we seeing hope and change? What areas? Education, criminal justice reform, economics, the job industry. Where are you all seeing hope and change?
I think it lies within each one of us in all of our arenas, whether it's law enforcement, education, labor, whatever. Those of us who have made it, for a time such as this, we can't get comfortable because I've made it to the top. There's an obligation that we have to reach back for those that didn't. And that was the difference in Dr. King's day. They had to pave the way. There was nobody to reach for them. They had to crawl and climb. And because we stand on the shoulders of many, that's where the hope is, that I'm in the door, then I'm going to reach and pull others in the door, and so on and so on, because too much is given, as much is required. We didn't make it just because we are smart. We didn't make it just because we kind and we is important, but we had to be qualified to do it. No, we can't get in our lofty nest and forget others. And because we are now inside, that we can use our voices to be that magnifying voice that everybody knows that this too is possible. And we're showing that we're trying to level the field. So I'm hopeful for the people that have already gone forth, that they are always, always reaching back and pulling in.
So what gives me hope and encourages me is that even this summer, you know, and thank goodness in the last week, what we've seen is corporations, they are not just making equity statements. We are now seeing resources going into communities on the ground to help with organizing, to help with organization building, to help with capacity building for entrepreneurs. That is not something that, you know, we've seen a lot, especially in Black and Brown communities. You know, that trickle down economics, it really hasn't worked very well for our community. But we are now seeing substantial investment, more than I've ever seen in my entire work life. And that really is encouraging to me. Now, do I believe that without continued pressure and continued voting with our pocketbooks, that will continue? No. But I think at this point, that corporations understand that if they are not aligning themselves with the values that are being communicated on the ground, that, you know, perhaps their bottom line will suffer. And that gives me encouragement.
I would say that well, I remember when I was in college, I didn't get most of what I thought was right on target. I was wrong more times than I was correct, because I was immature and didn't know anything. But I had a desire to learn and a desire to know. And I think some sense in listening to those who had gone on before me to take my advice. I'm exhilarated by the young people. I really am. I have an advantage because not so much these past few months because of COVID, but the young people I meet on our campus and on other campuses are full of enthusiasm, and they see something is wrong, and they don't get it right all the time. I didn't get it right all the time. I suspect that none of you got it right all the time, but you wanted to make a difference. And I see that in young people genuinely and sincerely. About a year or so ago, I was surprised because you never know how you affect young people. I found out that my granddaughter led a protest at her school in support of those athletes who were taking the knee. I had no idea. She would hear me in the house and around pontificating about this, that, and the other. I didn't think she was listening. She was listening. And it had an impact on her. And so we have to make sure that in whatever way we can, that we pour into them. And wow, I mean, it surprised. I was absolutely shocked that she would be engaged in that kind of positive and productive activity. I didn't tell her to do it, neither did her parents, neither did her grandmother. But that's what she did. And so let's be cognizant of the kind of environment that we surround them with, and be open to hear what they have to say. And as I said, they don't get it right all the time. I didn't get it right. There were some things, I'm sure, when my parents heard me speak, they must have thought I was from Mars. But it turned out okay. It turned out all right. And I have a lot of faith in the enthusiasm of the young people, like those who are activating and invigorating Black Lives Matter. They see something is wrong with criminal justice, and they want to do something about it. And we need to encourage them, give them guidance, instruction, correction. But let's never be in the business of dampening their enthusiasm.
Wow. What an amazing, that is so precious. I know you are just beyond proud of her. See, kids do listen, okay? Everyone thinks y'all not listening, they do. And they
watch.
imitate. So we've had some of you all who have been sharing some questions and comments that are in our chat section. We've got Julia, Alexis, and Andrea who have been monitoring your questions and comments. And I want to open the floor to you ladies to share some of the questions that you all are picking up. Julia, I'm gonna come to you first. You see a question or a comment in there that you'd like to pose to our panelists?
Absolutely. Thank you for that invitation. One question that I think is important and got quite a few likes on Facebook Live is, as young people are becoming more empowered to have a voice, they truly are wondering, who are the current leaders for Black people? Who came after Dr. King to lead us?
Good question.
Well, I'll take that on. You know, I don't think that there's any one leader. And to be honest, I don't think that Dr. King was the only leader in his time. You know, while he was a prophetic voice, there were many, many leaders. One of the leaders that I like to hold up a lot is E.D. Nixon in Montgomery. E.D. Nixon was the head of the NAACP. He was a Pullman porter. And you've probably, most people, if you don't study labor history, don't know E.D. Nixon's name. But he was very important to moving the movement. And I think that there are leaders in all kinds of organizations that are doing the same thing today. And so, you know, there's no Messiah. Joe Biden's not a Messiah. As much as we love Kamala Harris, she's not going to get us there. I think that the leadership that we're looking for is in us and in our communities. So,
Absolutely. And, you know, on a team, everybody is important, but everybody has a different role. And so, again, the same goal is, you know, the victory. And so, just as Vonda has said, you know, we have Stacey Abrams that helped us in the voting. We have this and that. So it's so many. But I'm glad because, you know, there's strength in that unity that we all don't think alike, and that one person is not calling the shots. And even when someone has moved out of that struggle, that's, you know what, someone's picking up the baton and carrying it further. So what unites us is our goal. The way that we might achieve it might be differently. But again, that's what makes it strong. And that's why it was resonated throughout our country this summer and even globally, because there was pockets everywhere that were taking that leadership role to make that voice heard.
All right, and then let's go to Alexis. Alexis, any questions or comments you want to share with our panelists?
Not at this time. The questions were aligned with the previous question.
Okay, all right. And I hope I'm pronouncing, is it Andrea or Andrea? Forgive me for not getting it right, but I'm gonna come to you now. If you can make sure I'm saying your name right, but also share any question or comment that you may have.
Sure, it's okay, Harriet. It's Andrea, but that's okay.
Great.
No worries. There's one question, if the group would like to speak to the influence, what can we do to really influence legislation as it relates to police brutality laws?
I'll take that just because that's what we're doing as the National Organization of Black Law Enforcement Executive Nobles. That's why we're pushing for legislation. You know, law enforcement is supposed to be an extension of our communities. And of course, we see that that's not played out. And so when we put it into law, then there's consequences when we see that a de-escalation was not used when it should be, that we've gone from stop to death. And so we have to put it into law, and that we can't leave it for the, you know, the decision of some lawmakers, some chiefs and law enforcement executives. So there has to be consequences, because law enforcement, we have to be seen as the guardians of our communities, not occupying forces or an adversarial force that comes when everything's bad. And so again, just like anything else, just like with the mandates of wearing a mask and everything, we have to make people do things and give them consequences. So even as we push, we have to memorialize this into law.
can I also add that if you want to be a part of influence and policy, policy is always tied to money, and money is always tied to budgets. And so whether it's at the local, state, or federal level, engaging in the process around budgeting helps to involve you in the influencing decision-making around whatever the issue is that you care about.
All right, I'm gonna come back to Julia. Do you have anything now, or still kind of waiting for more to filter in?
There is another question. Do you believe Dr. King's methods for nonviolence would be as effective in today's perilous times?
Dr. Dixon, would you like to take that one?
I would. I do think that nonviolence that is pursued with discipline and organizing acumen can still be very effective. Organizing is key. Stacey Abrams is a nonviolent direct action activist. She directed her organizing to registering people to vote and getting them out to vote. Black Lives Matter is organizing young people and others, allied groups, at the grassroots, disciplined and focused on criminal justice reform. There are other issues to be sure, but this kind of disciplined organizing, I believe, is effective, not for quick results, but for the long term and for the long run. And I wanted to address something else that was raised in a previous question about do we have any leaders and that sort of thing. Ella Baker, who was the founding mother of the Student Nonviolent Coordinating Committee, she was at loggerheads with Dr. King and other male leaders of the civil rights movement, and arguing that strong people don't need strong leaders, that the most important thing was grassroots organizing among people who never thought of themselves as being forthright and in leadership positions, whether they were low-wage male workers or low-wage female housewives, Fannie Lou Hamer, the Memphis sanitation workers, that these sorts of persons who never thought of themselves as having a large voice, it was important for them to be organized and to be able to articulate their grievances. She believed that you had to strengthen and bring to an awareness persons at the grassroots that they had the ability and they could marshal and mobilize their energies to bring about social change, not dependent on the arrival of some strong, articulate, well-educated, well-groomed leader.
And I'll add to the images bear themselves out. We saw what happened at the Capitol. Chaos is not the answer. Violence is not the answer. And let's just state it for what it is. There's a disparity in our criminal justice system of the treatment of Black and brown citizens versus the non-Black and brown. If that whole orchestration had happened last on the 6th and the participants would have been Black and brown, I stated it nationally, that would have been a bloodbath. They would still be putting toe tags instead of trying to find people that were part of that, because we don't need to give them a license to kill us. And that's what will happen. And even when that's done, even when you get through violence, when you get through collecting the bodies and counting, we still got to talk. So you have to have those uncomfortable conversations, and more of us that are able to, from every walk of life, to call it out for what it is. So yes, nonviolence is the way, because at the end of the day, you got to be alive to say something. And so exactly that strategy to move forward and use our voices collectively is what makes the change.
And let me ask one more question of our panelists before I go back to my co-moderators here who are monitoring the questions. You know, some people felt some guilt over the summer and even since then because, you know, they didn't go out and participate in the protest. So can you all speak to, and you all represent different areas of the movement, I feel, in your own way, how can people who are not the lead organizer, who are not in the middle of the crowd at the rally, how can they participate and contribute? Do they have a space and a role in all of this, or are only the people who are on the streets making the difference?
So I will say that talk to your neighbor. One of the things that we have found is that our nation is now one that is very divided. When I went into the workplace 30 years ago, the relationship that I had with my coworkers, mostly male, mostly white, I have seen, especially with the election of President Obama, deteriorate. I've seen people go into their silos, their echo chambers. And in order for us to make real change, folks are going to have to come out of those echo chambers. And that happens one conversation at a time. And so if it's just picking up the phone and talking to your neighbor that perhaps thinks differently than you do, that you haven't talked to in a long time, you might not have talked to since about 2008. Now is the time to begin to do that, because even with policy changes, even with all the other things that perhaps are on the horizon, unless we begin to come to some common understanding about what truth is, about what our common belief systems are, this experiment in democracy is just not going to work.
All right. And let's come back to Julia. I'm gonna come back to you. Have you seen anything come in your way yet? Questions or comments you want to share?
I think the panelists just spoke to some of this, but let me ask a specific question. The question is, are there changes recommended only for those at the top? Or what additional actions do you suggest for those who are trying to make a difference in their own communities, corporations, churches, families, etc.?
Linda or Dr. Dixon, would you like to, and can I add to that question just a little bit as we talk about how people can move in their areas to really contribute? How can they also work together? Because let's be honest, okay? It's not always that smooth and easy when groups have to come together for a common cause because some, want their name of the organization or their title, whatever, higher than the other. So how can they move within their, as you say, Vonda, their echo chamber? How can they elevate in that area to bring about change? And then how can they ensure they and other organizations work together? Collectively, cohesively, peacefully.
You have to have the same goal. Everybody is an individual and there's groups and whatever, but if we have the common goal, we can agree to disagree. We can have different ways to accomplish that. But if we're focused, that's what will unify us, is that goal that we're all trying to accomplish. And everybody have different tasks, because I dare to say, even before COVID, I'm not a person contrary to what I don't like crowds. I don't like be there, but there's work to be done. My daughter was handing out water, literature, talking and educating people. On all of our, where we all sit now, have those conversations. You'll be surprised at the men and women that sit beside you that are not even aware of how it affects you. So educating that. And let's not forget, there's a need for financing and everything, but there's work to be done, whether you do it, in your community, whether you do it in your neighborhood, or you do it on a larger platform with whatever organization. But the goal is what keeps everybody unified. And like right now, we're talking about police reform. So many groups are talking about it. We realize that the legislation has to come into effect from the administration. But again, we all working towards that goal. And we have to remain peaceful, we have to remain strategic, and we have to stay informed and communicate with each other.
Dr. Dixon, would you like to jump in on that? How can people elevate in their own silo, whether it be church, organization, neighborhood group? And then what can we do to ensure that we work together, that these groups come together as well?
First of all, I just like to echo what Ms. Williams said, because I think she was right on the money. You try to help and encourage people to do what they do. Some persons may not be willing to march, but they might give you a major contribution to the organization. They may not carry a sign, but they may put up the money to bail somebody out of jail. So you just have to find out what can you do? What are you willing to do? It takes a lot more than putting on a march and putting on a protest. It needs fiscal backing. And that's exactly what happened during the civil rights movement. That's how they involved undertakers and churches and others who put up the money so that persons could be bailed out and so that other kinds of expenses could be met. More to your point, more to the point of your question, African Americans still have a fairly impressive organizational infrastructure that we very, very seldom mobilize. There's the Divine Nine, but there's also the Panhellenic Council that can be mobilized. There are Baptist, Methodist, Episcopal, Presbyterian, Pentecostal churches, but there's also a Congress of National Black Churches, which aggregates all of these denominations in one federated organization. There are the Elks and the Masons and other organizations. We seldom mobilize these sometimes unfamiliar organizations to get involved in the struggle. The organizational infrastructure is there. What's lacking is an effective means to mobilize them toward these common goals.
I would like to speak just quickly
Sure.
about coalition building. You know, it is difficult and messy work. The Labor Council works with a variety of organizations that really are sometimes in conflict to what it is that we work with environmental groups, we work with NOAA, we work with churches, synagogues, all kinds of organizations. And what we find is that while we may not have organizational priorities in every area, we come together, we lay out what the priorities are for each one of our organizations, and we find the places where there's intersection between the organizations, and we work on those things together. And it's amazing what success in one area can do to help you to begin to work in other areas together. So I would say that coalition building is difficult work. But you can't always just work with the folks that agree with you. It is very important that you work with folks that have different ideas.
And for our last audience question here, Andrea, I'm going to come to you. Do you have anything new on your end?
I do. So there is a lot of conversation going on Facebook, and Linda sort of touched on it earlier, but there's a lot of conversation around sensitivity training for law enforcement. Is it working? Is it not working? It's more than just police officers. They're talking about judges, prosecutors, the entire effort. It's been mentioned that maybe we need to read, Driving While Black in Nashville. So people are having a conversation. What else can we do? And where does that accountability come from? And do you think that these sensitivity trainings are working and effective?
That's good.
Yeah, as a 30-year veteran of the Secret Service, I came in 1988. I tell people, I date myself because Ronald Reagan was president when I came on. But all of us have seen when we came in, there were no Black female supervisors. They didn't even know how to take us, how to do what, didn't even want to ride with us. But of course, through the progression of legislation and movement, you have to teach people some things that they don't know, and sometimes they don't know what they don't know. And so, that's when the diversity and inclusion came into the workplace. And so it made you recognize that people are different, that we don't shrink or I'm worse than you, or that you're better than me because we are different. And so, yeah, you can train people because sometimes people, ignorance is not knowing. And, I have folks that, even as students that say, I've never been around a Black person. But again, that's who they are. But when you know better, you do better. And I've always said, if you teach me, I can learn. So we have to keep having those conversations. And so we saw that this administration suspended that, but we got to bring it back. And you know what? And with having the diversity that we do in this incoming administration is a plus that the world can see that we are indicative of our communities, that we are all different. We don't have to shrink. We don't have to make ourselves small or make ourselves invisible. We have a voice, and our voice is a combination of all our experiences that we contribute to make us a viable citizen in this United States.
Did anyone else want to chime in on that? Or did she touch all corners of that?
Doors of the church open.
Speaking of doors of the church, we're about to bring the benediction in here in just a second. Well, that was our last question. We do want you all to just continue the conversation on Facebook because this is how we start the dialogue, and it just continues on. We have some more left in the program. This is where my part ends. I want to thank you all so very much for having me be a part of this program. I do want to recognize some very important ladies who are on this Zoom with us. We've got Alpha Delta Omega Chapter President Tawana Williams, Nu Kappa Omega Chapter President Sherry. I hope y'all forgive me on these names, okay? Is it Sherry or Cherie Long? And then we have Pi Nu Omega Chapter President Sandy Paulson Maston. So again, a special recognition of those important ladies who are on the call with us. And again, truly an honor it is for me to be a part of this program and to be on this panel, to even be considered enough to be on this panel of esteemed guests. And Linda, I'm going to reach out to you later. I needed you for an interview, girl, like last week. So I'll be in touch, okay? I got you, Janine will connect me. Everyone have a blessed night. Thank you. I'm going to now turn it over to Andrea Patterson, who will take us into the next part of the program. Or am I bringing it back to you, Janine?
No, thank you so much, Harriet. We will have a song to just close us out and just solidify everything that we've heard. I do want to ask, do our presidents have remarks they would like to make briefly before we bring up one of our our undergraduates? When we talk about the children will lead us, we do have an undergraduate member who will close us out with a final song for the evening.
Okay, so my name is Tawana Williams. I am the president of the Alpha Delta Omega chapter. I would like to thank our panelists for enlightening us on where we are and where we need to continue to grow. Thank you for this dialogue. I'm hoping that this is just the beginning of the dialogue that we will have amongst our various chapters and with our community. And so thank you to the various committees that were instrumental in planning this event for us.
Good evening, I'm Cherie Long. I am the president of the Nu Kappa Omega chapter in Clarksville, Tennessee. And I would just like to say thank you to our panelists and to our narrator. This has been a very enlightening evening of information that we need to share with our community and to move forward and to make the world a better place. You know, we're living in a time when things seem so unsettled, and every day there seems to be something different. But when you hear panelists like this, that gives us hope, and we want to share that hope with our community.
Yes, I'm Cassandra Maston Paulson, and I too want to thank Janine and this amazing committee for bringing together these distinguished moderator and panelists. I just want to say the expertise that they bring to us, I'm hoping from this day forward that we will make a more conscientious effort to pick up that roadmap, modify it where needed, and drive where we can affect more change. We have to really recognize what an amazing week we will witness a first and beginning, such as the opening of Nashville's National Museum of African American Music, and of course, the inauguration of Vice President-elect Kamala D. Harris. We will continue to be hammers, not anvils. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We'll now hear a selection from a member of the Ada Psi chapter at MTSU, Middle Tennessee State University, one of our undergraduate members, Miss Andrea Patterson.
Lift every voice and see till earth and heaven ring, ring with the harmonies of liberty. Let our rejoicing rise high as the listening skies. Let it resound loud as the rolling sea. Sing a song full of the faith that the dark past has taught us. Sing a song full of the hope that the present has brought us. Facing the rising sun of a new day begun. Let us march on till victory is won. Thank you.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. Good night.
Good night.